In the last hour, the Senate averted a government shutdown, passing a stopgap funding measure through September. Two Democrats, Senators Angus King of Maine and Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, joined all but one Republican, Kentucky's Rand Paul, in approving the measure. Earlier today, 10 Senate Democrats helped Republicans to advance the bill to final passage. The move came after Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer stunned progressive Democrats last night when he said he would vote to advance the funding measure. Schumer's decision triggered praise from Republicans and outrage from Democrats, including New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was reportedly being privately urged by some of her colleagues to primary the senior senator from New York come 2028.
I think there is a deep sense of outrage and betrayal. And this is not just about progressive Democrats. This is across the board, the entire party.
Frankly, I do have a very difficult time finding why any Democratic colleague of mine would vote yes on this. I think that in this moment, we have to stand up and fight.
Congress has a job to do. We swore an oath to uphold the Constitution, not to surrender Article 1 constitutional powers to the executive.
Joining me now, NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor and pollster and MSNBC political analyst Cornell Belcher. Sahil, help me understand how Democratic leadership in the Senate and in the House ended up in such different positions.
Well, they were certainly very divided in the last 24 hours, Alicia. There was not a coordinated strategy coming into this, which is why they were left in such a bad position. They did not, for one, anticipate Speaker Johnson being able to pass this through the House. And once he did, Democrats turned into a bit of a discombobulated mess, if I'm being candid, about the way this happened. There was initially silence on Tuesday once the bill passed the House, even though most Democrats unified to vote against it. Senator Chuck Schumer, the minority leader, did not take a position on it. The following day, after a lengthy and intense Democratic caucus meeting, he threatened to filibuster the bill, said there were not the votes on the Democratic side. And then about 24 hours later, he retreated from that, saying he was going to vote to advance the bill. I'm told in that interim 24 hours, he did not get any promises from Republican leadership. So this was not Schumer cutting a deal to keep, to let this bill pass. This was Schumer looking at his hands, deciding he didn't have the cards, and choosing to fold. He believes that a government shutdown would be a worse option than even this bill, that it would accelerate President Trump and Elon Musk's attempts to dismantle the federal government, that it would be OMB Director Russ Vought who gets to decide who's an essential employee and furlough all the non-essential employees that they don't want to be working, and the path to reopening the government, in Schumer's view, was simply not really there. He said there was no exit ramp. Having said that, the one thing Democrats really worry about, in addition to all the policy measures in this bill that they oppose, is that Democrats just taught Republicans they can write party-line government funding bills while cutting Democrats out of the process entirely. And Democrats, once it comes to the Senate, will fold, will cave and let it clear the filibuster. This was their one real piece of leverage, the 60-vote threshold. In this instance, they decided not to use it. Will they use it again in the future?
There was something Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, Cornell, which is the sense of outrage and betrayal, not being simply on the part of progressive Democrats, but being held by a broader cross-section of the base.
Yeah. Well, one, I'm happy to be in studio with you. I've been taking incoming calls and texts from friends all across the country.
Not as many as members of Congress, my friend.
And I got to tell you, there is a sense of outrage and disappointment. And many of them were wondering, really, there was no plan, like there was no coordination. And look, I think people should read Senator Schumer's op-ed he did in the New York Times, where he talked about, the lesser of the two evils, and him taking this vote was the lesser of two evils, which is a process argument. And in politics, if you're making a process argument, you're probably losing the argument. You're certainly losing the messaging, and I think they are losing the messaging. This was an opportunity for Democrats to show some fight, for something we've been hearing, ever since the election, actually even before the election, especially with our younger voters, is what's the difference between Democrats and Republicans? They've got to show us some fight. They got to show us that they stand for something and will fight for something. I think this was an opportunity missed on that part. But at the same time, I do understand from a practical legislative positioning, after reading Schumer's op-ed, I do understand his argument about this is the lesser of the two evils.
I mean, just to be clear, Sahil, did Schumer get anything from Republicans in exchange for those Dem votes?
He did not. According to a source with knowledge of these negotiations, Schumer was not promised anything from Republicans in exchange for that the difference between his threat to filibuster it on Wednesday and his decision on Thursday to move forward with it, which he, of course, got 9 Democrats in a crucial 60-vote threshold to clear that hurdle. So, no, he didn't get anything for it. There were also 4 amendments that were negotiated as part of a time agreement today. One was Rand Paul's amendment to cut foreign aid. That failed. There were 3 Democratic amendments. All 3 of those failed. So it's not like Democrats walked away with anything on this. They eventually passed the House bill unamended. Remember, this was a bill that Speaker Mike Johnson wrote with input from the White House, and he cut a deal with his conservative hardliners. So that's why you see this bizarre situation where Chuck Schumer is getting praised by Donald Trump, slammed by not only Democrats like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but former Speaker Nancy Pelosi put out a statement earlier today pleading with Senate Democrats to vote this bill down, essentially defy Chuck Schumer, which I've never seen before.
Last night at the Kennedy Center in D.C., the audience vigorously booing Vice President J.D. Vance. That's just part of the increasingly public backlash to Trump's second-term agenda. In North Carolina, a fiery crowd confronting GOP Congressman Chuck Edwards at a town hall event last night.
I believe that the president is very supportive of Ukraine. We should abolish the U.S. Department of Education. The decisions need to be made. Like him or not, Elon Musk has brought a lot of really smart people to Doge. I feel like this is not productive with everybody yelling at me. I mean, if you want to hear, you certainly will have the right in the next election to cast your vote based off of what you hear coming from me now.
That was inside of the venue. Outside, furious constituents chanting as well. This is the latest in a series of town hall confrontations between GOP lawmakers and voters. But the most surprising objection to Trump's policies just might be this one. Elon Musk's company Tesla sending a letter to the White House pleading for an end to the trade war, writing that Trump's actions are hurting the electric car manufacturer. Tesla joining many other American companies in adjusting their 2025 outlook due to Trump's erratic approach. It comes amid Wall Street fears about a potential recession. Compare the stock market in the first year of Trump's first term, which continued a rise that started under Obama, giving credit where credit is due. Now let's compare that to what's happening under Trump this time around amid his escalating tariffs. That is a brutal collapse. Politically, this is dangerous territory for Trump, whose allies have downplayed and deflected criticisms about the current state of the economy. The latest comes from J.D. Vance. In a new interview, Vance inadvertently echoing one of the biggest Republican gaffes of the last 2 decades. Then GOP presidential candidate John McCain claimed on the brink of the Great Recession that, quote, the fundamentals of the economy were strong.
Our economy, I think, still, the fundamentals of our economy are strong.
I think the fundamentals of the economy are actually quite strong right now.
Joining me now is Robert Reich, former labor secretary under President Clinton, and Michelle Goldberg, New York Times columnist and MSNBC political analyst. My thanks to both of you. Michelle, first, those town hall confrontations we were just looking at, they appear to be getting more intense. So what is next if the Republicans continue to run scared and they don't willingly meet their constituents where they are?
No, frankly, I don't think it's just Republicans. I mean, the amount of rage and despair out there among the millions and millions and millions of people who didn't vote for Donald Trump is really hard to overstate. And they're angry at Republicans, absolutely. A lot of them are, frankly, also pretty angry at Democrats. I mean, especially today with the Senate voting to pass this really disgraceful continuing resolution. I think that there is a desperate hunger among a lot of people for new leadership. And so in some ways, you can compare this moment to the Tea Party moment, which you both saw a lot of really raucous town halls You also saw a lot of primaries, and I think that we're heading towards both of those things.
So, Robert, what happens to the fundamentals of the economy if these trade wars continue?
The economy is already kind of unbalanced and fragile. The trade wars are bad for the economy because not only do they kind of cause every import to be more expensive and also generate retaliatory moves by our trading partners, but they also generate a lot of uncertainty. I mean, nobody knows which kinds of supplies and supply chains are going to be intact. Consumers don't know about the future. People don't know about their own jobs. So you have the combination, Katie, of not only these trade wars and the uncertainties, but also Elon Musk attacking verbally Social Security and other programs that Americans depend on for their incomes. You put those two together, and there's a great deal of fear in the American economy. I mean, a lot of consumers just simply don't know where to go, what to do. A lot of producers are putting on the brakes because they don't know where the economy is going.
So, Michelle, I want you to take a listen to what a GOP congresswoman just said when pressed on the real costs of Trump's policies. Take a listen.
What do you tell constituents when you hear automakers say that the cost of certain vehicles is going to skyrocket? It's going to jump upwards of $12,000 because of these tariffs.
Yeah. I tell them to relax. It might be a little uncomfortable, but long term, they know that this will be in their best interest.
I mean, when are Republicans going to be forced to have to reckon with this attitude, this idea that Americans just have to adjust and just be uncomfortable? I mean, it really, it's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, look, when are they going to have to reckon with it? In 2026? You know, and I hope people try to keep showing up at these town halls and demonstrating their displeasure. Before then, we need protests, but ultimately, you know, this is what comes of giving trifecta power to an unelected to an unstable autocrat, and you know whose economic policies are all over the map. And there are obviously people in the hardcore MAGA movement who are perfectly willing to endure pain for the cause, but I don't think that that's all Trump voters. I think that some of them genuinely did believe the propaganda that he was going to be, that as some sort of, that as a businessman, he was going to be able to lower prices.
So, Robert, I want you to listen to Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick right now talking about the trade war with Canada. Take a listen.
Why are we doing all this business in Canada if they're not respectful, if they're not thankful?
I mean, when do we force neighbors and trade partners to have to bend the knee and kiss the ring before we continue to do business with them?
Well, it's interesting, Katie, the word respectful and thankful. We heard that with regard to Ukraine. We expect everybody around the world, every nation, to kiss our ring, to be respectful and thankful. Well, trade is not a matter of being respectful and thankful. The economy and the global economy is not a matter of respect or thanks. It's a matter of coming up with goods and services that people want and making sure that the rules of trade are fair.
In 1942, there was a Boy Scout troop in Cody, Wyoming. And if you've ever been in Boy Scouts, or if you've ever had a kid, or in my case, a brother in Boy Scouts, you might know that the big day on the calendar is, say it with me now, Boy Scout Jamboree. In 1942, in Wyoming, a Boy Scout troop put out a call to all the nearby Boy Scout troops in all the nearby towns that they should get together to do the Boy Scout Jamboree that year, you know, which is like, you know, merit badge stuff and tying knots and digging ditches and making campfires, pitching tents and camping out. It's all that stuff. But in 1942 in Wyoming, when this one troop put out the call for the Jamboree, the other Boy Scout troops in the area did not respond, or they said no. Only one local Boy Scout troop in Cody, Wyoming, said yes, they would do it. The reason everybody else said no, or they didn't bother to answer, is because the Boy Scout troop that put out the call for the Jamboree was the one inside Hart Mountain, behind the barbed wire at the internment camp at Hart Mountain, Wyoming. It's basically a concentration camp where Japanese Americans had been forcibly relocated by the U.S. government at the start of World War II. Guard towers, barbed wire, soldiers with guns policing the perimeter, the whole thing. But that one Boy Scout troop from Cody, that's the one local troop that agreed to come to Hart Mountain to do a Scout Jamboree with the other Boy Scout troop there of Japanese American boys. And they did all the Jamboree stuff. They did the merit badge stuff. They tied knots. They set up tents. And they matched boys up from the two different troops. There were two particularly rambunctious, sort of, you might call them rowdy boys, one from each troop. A kid from Cody, whose name was Alan, and a kid from Hart Mountain, who was named Norman. And those two particularly rowdy kids, they ended up putting them together. They camped together in the same tent. And they very quickly came up with a scheme together. Because, see, there was this other kid from the Cody troop who Alan really didn't like. He said he was a bully. He really didn't like that kid. And so he enlisted his new tent mate, this kid from Hart Mountain, Norman. He enlisted him in a plan. They thought that rain was going to be coming that night when they were camping out in their tent. And so the two of them, Alan and Norman, who had just met, they very carefully dug a moat around their own tent with a channel that led off the moat and downhill. And the channel was aimed right at the tent of the kid who was the bully. And then in the middle of the night, sure enough, the rain came down, the moat filled up, and then the channel off the moat worked. And that downstream tent got inundated with all the rainwater from Alan and Norman's moat, and the bully's tent collapsed. And Alan and Norman collapsed in gleeful laughter at the prank they had pulled. And having pulled that off, Alan and Norman became lifelong friends. That was a very unusual Boy Scout Jamboree at Hart Mountain internment camp in 1942. More than 40 years later, in 1988, that little kid, Alan, from Cody, was now Republican U.S. Senator Alan Simpson of Wyoming. And that little kid, Norman, from Hart Mountain, he was now Democratic Congressman Norm Mineta. And together, in 1988, they convened bipartisan hearings on the legally, strategically, and morally disastrous decisions that led to 120,000 Japanese Americans, some of them citizens, some of them not, being forced out of their homes and forcibly relocated into prison camps. Alan Simpson and Norm Mineta drafted the 1988 Civil Liberties Act, which was signed into law by a president named Ronald Reagan. And that said that the internment of Japanese Americans in this country, which had been done under a law that dated back to the 1700s, a rarely used legal authority. That law signed by Ronald Reagan in 1988, the Civil Liberties Act, said that the internment of Japanese Americans had been based on racial prejudice and war hysteria and a failure of political leadership. 1988 Civil Liberties Act formally apologized on behalf of the United States of America to Japanese Americans for what we had done to them. And it paid them reparations just to try to make it right. The legal grounds for interning Japanese Americans in World War II was something called the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. That was only the third time it had ever been used in American history. It had been used in the War of 1812, it had been used in World War I, and it had been used for Japanese internment in World War II. Last night, we started to see headlines like this one at the Wall Street Journal, quote, Trump to invoke seldom used wartime law from 1798. Or this one from CBS News. Professor says Trump's plan to invoke Alien Enemies Act of 1798 sidesteps immigration laws. And then, inevitably, because of the history of that law, we started to see last night headlines like this from the ABC affiliate in San Diego in this case, Japanese Americans react to Trump's plan to invoke Alien Enemies Act. And then this morning, we got the news that Senator Alan Simpson of Wyoming died today in Cody, Wyoming, where he was from. He was 93 years old. President Donald Trump gave a speech today at the U.S. Justice Department, which itself is a rare thing for a president to do. In that speech, he was expected. White House sources had made clear to lots of reporters that President Trump was expected to announce at that speech that he is going to invoke the Japanese internment law. He is going to invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which, again, has only ever been used 3 times before in our country and always in wartime. And the last time we used it, men like Norm Mineta and Alan Simpson and fricking Ronald Reagan ended up moving the nation to apologize for it, to call it a stain on our national honor, and not only to formally apologize, but to pay reparations for what we have done. Trump wants to do it again. According to multiple White House sources in speaking with multiple reporters at multiple news agencies. That said, Trump didn't announce it at the Justice Department at his speech today. And he might have meant to. Who knows? His speech went completely off the rails. He started giving what sounded like orders to Justice Department officials in the room that they should go after a government watchdog group, Crew, that has brought lawsuits against his administration. The Justice Department should act against them somehow. And for something, he started to say that the Justice Department should go after CNN and should go after MSNBC and should go after a whole big list of people he sees as his enemies. So his speech, who knows how much of that was written and how much of it was just him being moved in the moment. He got so wound up about telling the Justice Department individually to go after his enemies today that maybe he forgot the part about let's rerun Japanese internment. But presumably that's coming. I'm assuming that it'll come in some midnight or 4 a.m. announcement or some misspelled all capital letters Truth Social post or something. We'll see.
David, what is your takeaway? We'll start with you. Welcome to you all. What is your takeaway of what has transpired over the last 48 hours to avoid shutdown?
I mean, there is obviously clear and very big divisions within the Democratic Party. And Schumer has made a very big break with the rest of his caucus. And, you know, I think the rebellion you're starting to see among Democrats it portends a lot of trouble for the Chuck Schumers of the world down the road.
Eddie, I'm going to guess that you're not siding with Chuck Schumer on the decision he made here. I'm just going to guess. I'm going to guess. But he was faced with 2 very bad options. And he would argue, and I'm not defending it, he would argue if they allowed the government to shut down, it would have given Trump the free pass to blame the market crash and everything else, blame it on the Democrats. And his argument would be now all the chaos, all the problems are landing squarely in the lap of Trump.
So I understand the argument in some moments. I find it compelling. But if you're going to roll, at least fight. If you're going to roll over, at least fight. Right? And I think this is not ideological in terms of the difference between us in this regard. It's really about what are you doing? Why don't you just simply lay out what's the problem with the CR? Lay out how it's going to impact.
We don't know. Most people have no idea what's in it.
How it's going to impact Social Security. How is it going to impact veterans? How it's going to unleash big money, right? How is it going to free up, right, Donald Trump, the guards between, or the divisions between the executive and Congress, right? All of this stuff that's going to land in the lap of the Democrats anyway. You don't fight. You just say, well, things would be... Fight, damn it. That's all we want.
The flip side on that, though, is if indeed the government shut down, Russell Vought, the head of the Office of Management and Budget, can decide what is essential and what is non-essential.
I get that.
In terms of personnel, in terms of spending. And I'm mildly sympathetic.
Are you saying it would be a gift to Doge?
Yeah, it would be a gift to Doge in a certain sense, and for as long as the shutdown went on. Now, and we also know politically that whoever is deemed responsible for the shutdown gets blamed for the disruption. And we saw that with Republicans over the course of the last several decades. I'm mildly sympathetic.
How would the Democrats get blamed?
Yeah, I believe that we are overestimating on some level the degree of fluency that the average American voter has in terms of why anything is happening in Washington. And I would imagine my hypothesis would be, Steph, that if there is a shutdown and there is just further chaos, that sort of always permeating sense that stuff is unstable right now, that goes and redounds to Donald Trump. The idea that we are going to parse as an American people why this happened, why a shutdown would have happened, I think it's overthinking it. I mean, just to borrow another sort of like combat, a sports metaphor, a football metaphor, actually, you don't do what the other team wants you to do. You know,
well, I think Rick Wilson said that in a sense. If Donald Trump is praising you, you've blanked up.
Why do what Donald Trump wants you to do? Just on that basic, simple logic, it feels like the other thing might have been the safer strategy politically.
Okay, but on the Democrat side, this clearly shows the generation gap within the party that we'll now see play out over the next 4 years. Maybe that's a good thing. Right? Democrats lost the last election, and we've been saying for the last 6 weeks, what's their path? Who's in charge? What are they going to do? Maybe this fracture is exactly the fracture that they need to say, well, we got to figure this out, who we are, what we're going to do.
I think absolutely. I think we don't want to reduce it to just simply a kind of generational divide, but I do think it reflects some substantive differences in terms of strategy, in terms of approach, in terms of vigor and passion.
Media usage, social media usage.
Right, exactly. But
maybe it's not generation, maybe it's new voices, new minds, new ideas.
Yeah, I think that's the key. There's a sense in which Schumer and those who came of age prior to the ascent of the Trump era, they have an understanding of comity. They have an understanding of the ways in which you work across the aisle. These younger folks did not come into politics under those conditions. They're nostalgic for a form of politics that no longer exists, for a party that they're engaging that no longer exists.
When they're saying that's not the way things are done, the new team is saying, well, welcome to the new world.
Oh, Chuck Schumer embodies the status quo. You know, like
he does? What do you mean?
Well, an incumbency, this idea.
Get it?
Exactly.
You got that?
Yeah. That's pretty good.
The issue, though, is that there's just a real now opportunity. The issue is the opportunity. Right. It has never been clearer how to distinguish yourself from the current leadership of the Democratic Party, and it's just now it's an opportunity inside of an opportunity for someone to seize.
But as we've seen, too, though, I mean, the senior senators, the senior Congress people are clinging onto their positions and not giving any ground. We've seen this on both sides. I mean, Chuck Grassley is 90-plus years old. Oh. Dianne Feinstein died in office. You know, Nancy Pelosi is still there. Chuck Schumer is still there. And someone's going to have to seize power from them in order to turn this ship around. Because
well, when things are broken, listen, when there's a shakeup, when things are broken, that's when there's an opportunity. Let's talk about Donald Trump, though. The chaos that we are seeing this week, whether it's tariffs, whether it's Doge, well, we can focus on Doge, is the chaos he's creating so much and so bad that at the end of we're firing the people, maybe they're getting reinstated, is the government going to end up, unfortunately, being as ineffective as he claims it is?
I mean, absolutely. And I think that's partly by design, right? He and his administration are throwing so many things at us every single day. There's only so many hours in the day for people to be outraged or even to focus on the litany of things that are happening every day. And I think part of the goal here is to beat people down with this barrage of stuff. And I also think that, you know, if things get broken in the process, they can then point to those broken things as evidence of the dysfunction and ineptitude of government, when in fact a lot of that is going to be the result of the dysfunction and ineptitude of the Trump administration.
So are we misreading these headlines?
Yes.
And we're going, oh, look, the judge is reinstating all these workers. In name only. There's not actually a process to bring any of these people back. To what job? To where? Who's the administrator doing it? There isn't anyone.
I think fundamentally most people misapprehend what's going on right now. Financial markets are underpricing the reality of what's going on right now, which is...
We don't know what that means. Explain.
The markets are not taking into account the fact that this administration is trying to restructure the entire post-World War II architecture, economically, geopolitically, militarily, in ways that are not short-term pain for long-term gain. We can see a lot of pain that will persist for time to come, and I don't think that people really understand what's at play here, that this is a massive, nearly unprecedented change in a variety of U.S. policies that are not going to, in my estimation, are not going to work out well for a lot of people.
Is part of the problem that they're tearing things up, but no one has yet to articulate what the solution is on the back end?
100%. I mean, are we raising tariffs to get everybody else to go to zero? and we have a tariff-free world? Are we, reordering NATO so that, yes, European countries spend more on defense, but European countries are now starting to spend more on defense and pulling away from the United States at the same time? We're not getting tighter. We're ripping the alliances apart that will do long-term damage geopolitically.
And not only on the back end, we have to ask some questions about the front end. What are the values motivating these actions? What's the
concept? You really? I mean,
no, I have a theory.
I'm not talking about politics.
I got a theory.
Okay, I'm listening.
Twitter. I think there's a gross overestimation from the part of Donald Trump's current administration that is extraordinarily online. And a lot of what they're doing is fundamental point scoring, as if everybody is arguing on this social media platform, as opposed to actually paying attention to, wait a minute, so how many veterans do people know who are losing jobs? Is Social Security really a Ponzi scheme in the minds of the people that I know in real life?
Here's where Republicans are going to run into a problem. Even if they win in terms of media and the misinformation machine, even if they dunk on everyone on Twitter all day and every day, the impact of the policies that they're changing are going to be devastating to people's lives across the country. Right. And the majority of the American people don't give a hoot about government. They want to make sure they can put food on the table, their kids are going to a good school, and they're healthy. And if what the government is doing is breaking down those things, then people are going to be without. And it doesn't matter if Elon Musk is dunking on you on Twitter. The reality will be the reality.
Yeah, but Steph, I think that part of the problem here is that who are people going to blame when they don't get their Social Security checks? Are they going to blame the Trump administration for sowing chaos, or are they going to blame some deep state conspiracy for having screwed something up against Donald Trump's wishes? And I think part of the problem right now is that with Trump and Musk's domination of social media and a lot of other kind of communication platforms, it is I don't have a lot of faith that that a lot of voters are going to necessarily get the clear story about the cause and effect.
Well, the town hall meetings seem to suggest that they do know who's responsible. But I know y'all.
That's a small sample size,
hold on,
right?
Hold on. Eddie, share your thoughts.
I know y'all think I'm an egghead.
Okay, but no.
Just because
But I want to insist on certain things, right? So when we talk about the human cost of these policy decisions, right? That forces us to answer the question, what are our obligations to each other? Baseline obligations as Americans. What does it mean for us to be here living together? What is the responsibility of government to act on behalf of those values that define how we live together? We've been shredding the freaking social safety net since 1980. What's our obligation to our elderly? What's our obligation to the poor? What's our obligation to children? What's our obligation to the sick? What's our obligation to people who defend the nation? I don't care. Democrats, I'm not asking you to be New Deal Democrats or Great Society Democrats. We don't need shorthands. Stand on the freaking values that produce the policies of Social Security, that produce the policy of Medicaid, the values that people don't want to relinquish.
But when those things happen, no, it's great. I'm right there with you. But look, so what happens if they cut Medicaid, if they cut food stamps? And look, my family was on food stamps. When they cut food stamps, yes. So my family went through this. My dad lost a business. We were on food stamps. Nobody does this by choice, right? You're not on Medicaid by choice. And when they stop sending those checks, if anyone thinks these town halls are even mildly emblematic of what's likely to happen, if they start cutting Social Security, this is people in the streets time. This is revolutionary stuff.
Turn now to one community in Ohio, which is now the center of a growing national debate about civil rights, hate speech, and the Second Amendment. NBC News correspondent and NBC News Now daily anchor Morgan Radford visited the town of Lincoln Heights, where residents have formed an armed community defense group in the wake of a neo-Nazi rally. Morgan joins us now. You were there just on Tuesday. What did the residents tell you about what's going on?
Yeah, I was there just this week. John, it was fascinating because what's interesting is that this town was founded during the Great Migration back in the 20s as a refuge for black citizens, which is why it was especially painful when neo-Nazis suddenly appeared in this 3,000-person majority black town. But they decided to fight back, taking up arms and patrolling their own streets. Now they're at the center of a much larger debate about protection and free speech and who gets it.
These aren't police officers or soldiers.
They're business owners, their fathers, their sons, daughters.
These are civilians, members of the Lincoln Heights Safety and Watch program.
It's a duty. Okay, let's go.
The duty, protecting their neighborhood, the majority black village of Lincoln Heights, Ohio. After neo-Nazis held a rally here last month, carrying rifles, waving swastikas, and hurling racial slurs, just moments before children were let out of school. At the time, law enforcement officials said the neo-Nazis did not break any laws, but an investigation by county prosecutors is ongoing. Weeks later, the KKK came with these flyers.
First African-American community above the Mason-Dixon line of staff.
Safety and Watch Group spokesperson Durrance Daniels says the police did not do enough, which was more chilling because the town was founded in the 1920s as a safe haven for black residents.
Lincoln Heights is our home. If somebody broke into your home, you call the police, and the police says, you know, if they do it again, we haven't broken any laws, so we're just going to allow them to break into your home again. What would you do?
Are you worried at all that having a potentially armed response could just create more friction, create more danger?
I'll answer that by saying I've never felt safer as a black man in my community than I have right now.
The mayor of Evendale, which oversees the police force that responded that day, said in a statement to NBC News, "Our emphasis on de-escalation and public safety resulted in the incident's resolution without injuries to any of the persons involved." But residents here say they can't afford to wait. Every day, the Safety and Watch Group escorts children to school and patrols the streets.
Why do you all wear masks?
Those Nazis, we have reports of them finding our backgrounds, so we're not hiding ourselves from the residents, but we're protecting our family from what we're doing out here.
While many locals do support the security group, some, like business owner Eric Ruffin, say they wish the group wasn't needed.
We don't want to become what we hate. You know, we don't want to become a group of people that walk around feeling like we have a reason in America to have to protect ourselves.
And this community
Stand up.
Stand up.
Is not backing down.
We contacted the mayor of Evendale's office, and they say that prosecutors are looking at body camera footage of the neo-Nazi rally to see if any criminal charges could be filed. But meantime, the Hamilton County Sheriff is also calling on state lawmakers to pass legislation making it a crime to wear a mask with the purpose of intimidation while open carrying, guys.
So, Morgan, let me ask you, one of the people you interviewed there, a young man, said he's never felt safer in his community than he does now. So this could have an impact nationwide, things like this. I mean, there is a contagion factor in safety. People always seek it. What did the mayor or anybody that you spoke to think about the contagion factor?
Durrance, I don't want to speak for him, but after my conversation with him, I feel like I could confidently say he would say the contagion factor has already happened. Because when I asked, is this a reaction to a local moment or a national movement? And he said, look at January 6th. He said, you already have people felt emboldened to come here locally because of what they saw nationally. If you can hang from the building of the hallowed halls of the Capitol and then be pardoned, not be prosecuted, why don't you think you can come to a small village of African Americans, only 3,000 people?
Morgan, does the group have any real authority? But as long as they stay within the confines of the law, they should be okay.
It's a great question. You know, I asked that basically, are you stopping cars when they come in because you think someone looks suspicious? Is that, you know, profiling in its own sort of way? And they said, no. We are patently aware of what our rights are and what our limitations are. They said, we're not officers. What we do is we are trying to cooperate with the police department. So if we see suspicious activity, because remember the KKK came back with flyers just after this rally. So they're saying this is more of a defensive posture to deter people from entering our community and showing them by virtue of our masks, by virtue of our guns, that you can't come here and we're not going to take this punch lying down.
All right, an important story, fascinating. NBC News correspondent and NBC News Now daily anchor Morgan Radford. Morgan, thank you. Good to see you.